Hello, I am Bob Johnston, a landscape archaeologist from the University of Sheffield. My co-presenters are Emily Trobe-Bateman and John Roberts. Emily works for Historic England, having been a doctoral researcher at the University of Sheffield, and John is the archaeologist for Snowdonia National Park Authority. He was the project manager for the Carneddau Landscape Partnership Scheme's development phase, and we'll come to that project slightly later in the talk. We're going to use this paper to follow the evolution of a digital survey project across different manifestations, from small-scale and relatively informal studies through a sustained, funded research project to a major multi-partner community-focused conservation project. We believe this is a useful and successful case study, and we will draw some broader principles from our experiences. So our geographic focus is northwest Wales, and specifically Snowdonia National Park and its margins. The largest archaeological features in these landscapes have also been the most difficult to describe and understand. They are late prehistoric, Roman and some later fieldscapes, and we use the term fieldscape to describe the systems of field boundaries, stock enclosures and settlements. And on this RAF vertical aerial photograph, the fieldscapes are these earthworks picked out on the slopes above Eryri, a mixture of medieval and earlier fields and settlements. The fieldscapes should be a critical source for understanding the organisation and economic life of late Bronze Age to Roman period societies. Beyond a few isolated investigations, though, the fieldscapes have not been subject to sustained research since the 1960s. While wider studies of prehistoric and early historic field systems in the UK and North West Europe have given almost no heed to the evidence from North West Wales. Toby Driver's splendid aerial photographs, of which this one of Awdurdod above Harlech is one, are vivid, if small, windows into expansive, complex and subtle landscapes. In this case you can see the hut group towards the bottom of the screen, a series of stone boundaries running off, then underneath the current fields and reappearing here towards the top of the image with another enclosure. The availability of a Welsh Government remote sensing dataset produced using LiDAR offered the opportunity to change this situation. Now widely used in archaeological applications, LiDAR, or Light Detection and Range Finding, is an aircraft-mounted system that generates highly accurate topographic models of the ground surface. This new data has major implications for the academic understanding and conservation management of the fieldscapes. We now have the potential to reconstruct the geography of the later prehistoric and Roman landscape. There are large areas of early fieldscapes that have never been recognised before, meaning that they are not actively managed as part of the historic environment. There are threats to the survival of the fieldscapes, such as afforestation schemes and climate change impacts. The potential impacts of Brexit and policy change on agriculture and land management practices in the uplands are a particular worry. In 2016, John and I applied successfully for PhD funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, particularly from their collaborative doctoral awards scheme. Emily undertook and has recently completed this work. And we offer this as a case study in how our research shifted from casual observations and piecemeal survey to an ambitious project that mapped and interpreted the fieldscapes throughout the study region. It established a foundation for a major multi-partner conservation and public engagement scheme, the Carneddau Landscape Partnership, which John will talk about. Now I'll hand over to Emily to present an overview of her recently completed research.
Thanks, Bob. This is the first public presentation of my research results, and given the time available today, I'm only able to outline some of the major findings and context for this work. I'd like to thank my primary funder, the HRC, and also acknowledge the help and support at staff at the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. The Carneddau form part of a larger study area in North West Wales, which totals almost 1,500 square kilometres. As Bob mentioned, the analysis was primarily based on 1 metre resolution LiDAR datasets collected for mainly flood defence purposes. I used the Relief Visualisation Toolbox developed by the Institute of Anthropological and Spatial Studies in Slovenia to generate multiple LiDAR visualizations, greatly improving feature visibility and digitising accuracy. This slide demonstrates some of the visualizations commonly used in the research. Interpreting LiDAR images in combination with Ordnance Survey maps, aerial photography, and historic environment records led to the creation of almost 14,000 archaeological features, predominantly earthwork and stone banks. This work dramatically increased the number and distribution of early fieldscape features. More than 4/5 had not been previously recorded. In the Carneddau, almost 4,000 individual elements were identified. Simple local relief models were particularly good at revealing ploughed-out boundaries in lower-lying areas. For example, faint traces of earthwork banks can be observed below the upland fringe at Cenedlaethol, shown on the left slide. Open positive LiDAR models often revealed settlement sites and routeways in more detail, as shown here on the right. These fieldscapes have a beauty and coherence that can be seductive. The ability to see a vast landscape from above prompts us to consider land division at a regional scale, making temporal and spatial connections between features. Alongside mapping, it was important to focus on understanding their emergence, use, and eventual abandonment. Working in an academic context provided an opportunity to think about how the collection and analysis of digital data could help address wider research questions. I focused initially on the type and consistency of information associated with digitised features, their attribute data. As you can see from this slide, different individual monuments could be made up of different and multiple elements. Collecting geospatial extents and attribute data for transcribed feature form and monuments enhanced their accuracy and analytical potential. Creating a separate workflow to categorise monuments also highlighted the reliance on morphology and typology for identifying and dating features. It showed that there was no reliable chronological information to support established models of land division. The large sample size, rich metadata and consistency of the early fieldscapes dataset created opportunities to consider new approaches. The analysis initially set out to identify the location of well-preserved fieldscapes. I worked in collaboration with University of Sheffield geographer Stephen Hinks to develop new methods to measure the relative height of features and their density. Relative feature height is based on measuring height values within and adjacent to features. As you can see from this slide, well-preserved features such as narrow earthwork banks have higher relative height than less well-preserved examples. The coherence of these features was assessed through a novel use of natural grouping analysis based on location and designed to maximise within-group similarity and between-group differences. The results proved that preservation and coherence were a good way to assess fieldscape integrity, providing the basis for exploring their character. Detailed datasets for feature, sinuosity, alignment, aspect, slope and elevation were derived through further geospatial and statistical analysis. More than 2/3 of boundaries were located on south, southwest or west-facing slopes. Just under a third were on north or northwest facing slopes. While no relationship was identified between boundary alignment and slope, a significant weak correlation was identified between alignment and elevation, and a weak negative association also identified between sinuosity and elevation. These patterns indicate that boundaries were slightly more curvilinear as elevation increased. However, comparison between different clusters of fieldscape features showed that variations in sinuosity between geographic areas was more significant. In addition, the distribution pattern for boundary alignment shows that they were found within a very tight range, about 34 degrees, across all slopes and all fieldscape clusters. Almost 80% were aligned perpendicular to the prevailing wind direction. These observations indicate distinctive patterns emerging from people's detailed knowledge of and responses to microtopography. Communities selected sunnier slopes to settle and farm, and they built stone and earthwork banks to reduce the impact of prevailing winds. Across mountainous terrain, this created a network of curvilinear and irregular boundaries. On lower-lying slopes and flatter land, sinuosity was less pronounced, but boundary alignment appears to have responded to environmental conditions in a similar way. These preliminary findings illustrate the power of geospatial techniques and detailed data collection to breathe new life into narratives about early land division. Rather than interpreting boundary and settlement types as evidence for the natural evolution of farming, attention focused on exploring the materiality of boundaries, evidence for continuity and change, and the relationship between fieldscapes and subsistence practices. The geodatabase developed as part of this research can be reused and enhanced, improving the efficacy of future fieldwork and allowing both temporal and spatial patterns to be reassessed. And on that note, highlighting the potential of future work and analysis, I will hand over to John.
Hello, everybody. We started from observations about poor awareness of Snowdonia's early fieldscapes. As Emily has demonstrated, large areas of fieldscapes had not been recognised previously, and further areas must be present in the gaps in her data coverage. These results raise important conservation questions: how to protect and manage the fieldscapes. It also highlights the challenge of raising public awareness and enjoyment of them. Local knowledge about fieldscapes is poor despite their ubiquity. The most prominent areas are recognised and protected as nationally important scheduled monuments, but the fieldscapes are too widespread for legal protection through scheduling to address all management concerns. Better public awareness is needed to help create a stronger foundation for sympathetic management. The problems in part due to inadequate promotion. Fieldscapes can look striking on the ground, but often they're a bit disappointing to the uninitiated. But as we've seen, from the air, they're spectacular and can really capture the imagination. So, how best to tackle these issues and improve awareness and enjoyment of these landscapes? Good engagement requires meaningful opportunities for significant participation. LiDAR has great potential. Its visualizations can be dramatic, and a number of excellent projects elsewhere have demonstrated its ability to draw and hold public attention. In 2017, following a 2-year development phase, the Carneddau partnership was awarded £1.7 million by the National Heritage Lottery Fund. There are 23 partners, led by the Snowdonia National Park Authority. Its scheme for the Carneddau has a broad vision. That is, to help conserve the threatened heritage of the Carneddau through practical projects and by increasing understanding and enjoyment of the cultural and natural heritage of the area. It covers 220 square kilometres of mountainous upland and the surrounding river valleys and coastal strip that bound it. It has 2 of Wales's 5,000-metre peaks, varied ecology, rich cultural heritage, much of it articulated through Cymraeg, the Welsh language, and spectacular archaeology. From the early days of the scheme's development, we've been interested in LiDAR, inspired by projects in the South Downs and New Forest National Parks. Emily's work showed the potential of the 1 metre data, but has also made clear that higher resolution would be both more effective and easier to use for archaeological purposes. There are major gaps in the current 1 metre data coverage. Here, for example, you can see how transcription is limited by patchy coverage. We applied successfully to the Welsh Government to fund 0.25 metre LiDAR for the Carneddau area, forming part of the match funding package for the scheme. You can see what a difference the finer resolution makes in terms of the visibility of archaeological features. During the development phase of the scheme, there was a lot of interest in LiDAR at our consultation sessions. We held a pilot exercise training day delivered by the excellent and much appreciated Rebecca Bennett of Pushing the Sensors Consultancy, and we had very positive feedback. We're focusing on the fieldscapes today, but of course, this isn't the limit of LiDAR's interest, which extends to other archaeological features, as well as to other disciplines, such as ecology, geomorphology, conservation, peatland, and water management. As you can see from the slides, one of the reasons the features are difficult to recognise on the ground is gorse and bracken scrub, which is damaging to them. The LiDAR will help to see through and map this vegetation and to identify areas for the targeted clearance work that forms another element of the scheme. The Carneddau scheme started in early 2020. Yes, surely before COVID-19 brought so many aspects of our lives to a halt. Despite COVID-related complications, the 0.25 metre data was captured last spring under the required leaf-off vegetation conditions. Since then, the data has been checked and evaluated, and seamless visualizations have been produced. A silver lining, if it's appropriate to call it that, of the delays due to the COVID restrictions has been the chance to take stock. Our model of face-to-face training sessions and field days for volunteers needs to be overhauled. These opportunities will return, but we need and want to do things differently. We aim to build a much greater component of digital delivery, including within training, activities, and guidance into the scheme. It has also enabled us to convene a group of people involved in community LiDAR archaeology projects. We held a seminar last week, organised on our behalf by Rebecca Bennett. It was both inspiring and impressive to hear about many excellent initiatives around the UK and Ireland. From my point of view, some of the key learning points related to the current popularity of and media interest in LiDAR, that LiDAR can appeal to wide and new audiences, that LiDAR is a great base for participatory research, interpretation, and wider engagement activities for enjoyment, health, and well-being. And of course, that it's important to understand and meet the interests of different audiences, for example, by providing tiered levels of engagement and participation. And on the technical side, that there have been excellent recent developments in LiDAR viewing, manipulation, and dissemination portals by a number of projects, including important open source solutions. And also that national leadership is needed in relation to concerns about long-term storage of and access to large LiDAR data sets. And I'd just say that the Republic of Ireland is a current exemplar of good practice in this respect, as well as for the creation and maintenance of registers of project data. We have shown the huge potential of LiDAR data to tackle long-standing research issues. We have also raised wider concerns about fieldscapes, including their management, conservation threats, and low public awareness. Emily's work has transformed the record for the fieldscapes and established new methodologies for geospatial analysis. It is not intended to form a definitive record. The data and the landscapes they represent are sources from which interpretations and a record can be derived. A widely acknowledged principle of landscape survey and of aerial mapping is the importance of revisiting a landscape at different times and from different perspectives. This iterative process is critical to documenting and understanding the detail and the relationships that underpin accurate mapping and persuasive interpretations. Historic environment record systems are less able to cope with the potential for mass creation and mobilization of data that comes with increased public involvement in recording. The variable quality and reliability sits uncomfortably with the definitive aspirations of many current record systems for the historic environment. Moving towards more publicly orientated records that could enable and encourage community engagement would mean systems that, firstly, could accept many different types of data within tiered layers of certainty, accompanied by systems of validation. As an ecological example, see Cofnod, the record system of the North Wales Environmental Information Service. And secondly, systems that are better equipped to accommodate spatial data. Point data is an inadequate mechanism for managing geospatial data in a digital world. Community LiDAR projects across the UK are doing a great job of engaging varied audiences and generating new information about and better awareness of the historic environment. As we continue with the Carneddau scheme, we hope that we will be able to join the success of these inspirational projects. The iterative process of landscape investigation that we've highlighted will benefit enormously from community participation. To enable it to do so most effectively may require new and more open approaches to the creation and management of records.